It's 1991 and the winds of change are definitely starting to blow now, because although the arcades are still king, Sega have got a little blue ace up their sleeve that they're just about to drop. Hair metal might still rule the radio, but there is a grungier side on the way and it's becoming much more mainstream. If you're interested in taking another trip down this nostalgic lane with me, well, my name's Stuart, this is Generation Pixel, and welcome to the Pixel Years. Breaking news in 1991, the newfangled internet thing has finally got a new service for us. Apparently it's called a website, but there is only one, and you can check it out at the address below. Overseas in the former Soviet Union, the hammer and sickle is lowered over the Kremlin for the very last time. Instead, there's going to be a new shiny tricolour Russian flag flying there. The winds of change truly are blowing. And finally, over in Japan, Nintendo Go Super. But is it too little, too late in their battle against Sega for gaming superiority? And that is your news in 1991. So hello friends and welcome back to the Pixel Years, and yes, here we are in 1991, an absolutely fantastic year in not only gaming but music and movies and a whole host of other pop culture too, and I hope you're about to enjoy what's going to be on offer today. So let's start with the very first game that took up most of my time in 1991. We're staying on the PC because I'm quite not there with the consoles yet, and the game is Castles. Now, what was it that made Castles so important to me in 1991? Well, quite simply, it was a generational thing. Being a Gen Xer from Scotland meant that I had cut my video game teeth on arcade classics and microcomputer games. So by the time 1991 rolled around, many Gen Xers were in their late teens or early 20s. And although the high action and the short-lived nature of the arcade games of the 1980s was something that we truly loved, well, we were getting a little older now and looking for something a little bit bigger to get our teeth stuck into. And Castles was one of those early games that certainly identified that need in us. Now, of course, 2 years earlier, the game SimCity had absolutely established this fact. But 2 years is a very long time when it comes to the advancement of technology in video games. And what Castles brought to the table was the wonderful 3D graphics. Now, yes, they don't look stunning compared to the graphics that we get these days, but as I said, 2 years is a very long time indeed, and from the top-down 2D blocky graphics of SimCity, we were absolutely astounded by the 3D presentation of this particular game. And of course, like SimCity, it wasn't just about the building aspect of the game. There were three very distinct gameplay mechanics embedded into Castles. Probably, yes, the most important one was the building of the castle, or castles depending on what level of the game that you were playing on. There was, of course, the obligatory resource management section of the game, and just to give the game a little bit of narrative, there was a text-based multiple choice adventure segment to the game as well. So combining this text-based narrative adventure with the building of a castle and resource management, I truly did embrace Castles at the ripe old age of 18 and could quite happily sink hour upon hour into the game. But could I recommend you playing Castles in 2023? Well, probably not unless you've got a little bit of nostalgia for the game. I can quite happily sit back and dip into this game and experience or re-experience what I felt in the early 90s, but there are far better examples of this style of game out there, including the sequel to Castles, the very aptly titled Castles 2. But in 1991 this was good enough for me, and that is Castles from Quicksilver, distributed by Interplay in 1991.
It's a beautiful day in the sewers for the race between the shell-top 4x4 and the cheapskate.
Hey, dude!
And they're off! The 4x4 takes the lead with a little push. Now they come to the first foot obstacle. This is where the turtle turret ooze shooter comes in handy. But wait, the race has come to a halt. Have the vehicles broken down? Is the race over?
Nah, we ran out of fuel.
And the next game that took up most of my time in 1991 was Lemmings. Now, Lemmings was a game that took me absolutely by surprise, and merely because it's a puzzle game. And it's not that I don't enjoy puzzle games, it's just one of the genres that I'm not overly attracted to. And try my best to cast my mind back to particular puzzle games that I did enjoy in the run up to Lemmings, I can only really think of the Thunderbird game that was on the ZX Spectrum. Now, that's not saying I don't like puzzles in video games, because, well, obviously I do. One of my all-time favourite games is Resident Evil, and if it wasn't for the fact that there was some wonderful little puzzles littered throughout that game, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as the game managed to achieve. And not just obviously for the puzzle factor, but in my humble opinion, the puzzles did help that game a great deal. So what was it about Lemmings that dragged me away from my usual gaming habits and sucked me into the puzzle genre? Well, after a great deal of thought about this particular conundrum, I come up with this two-step theory. Firstly, the Lemmings are just so damn relatable. You have an actual living, breathing character at the core of this particular puzzle game. And 2, the level design is absolutely stunning. Not only is it one of those games that just make you play that one more game, but it was also one of those rare and wonderful puzzle games that gave you the opportunity to stop, because it wasn't merely just after a high score. So in summary, this particular puzzle game gave you 100 little creatures that you actually cared about and put them into a wonderfully structured series of levels that really pushed you on to play, well, just one more as I said, but also gave you that blessed option to stop at any given point. Now, I'm sure most of you watching this have played Lemmings already, or at least have experienced it in some shape or form. And I'm also sure that most of you will agree when I say yes, definitely, in 2023 it is totally and utterly acceptable to sit down and play some Lemmings. And of course then ponder how DMA could go from this cutesy puzzle platformer to Grand Theft Auto. So yes, if you can get your hands on a copy of Lemmings today, definitely sit down and play it on whichever format you can.
I don't wanna grow up, don't wanna grow up. I don't wanna grow up, don't wanna grow up. I don't wanna grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. There's a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. From bikes to trains to video games, it's the biggest toy store there is. I don't wanna grow up, 'cause if I did, I couldn't be a Toys R Us kid. I don't wanna grow up, don't wanna grow up. I wanna be a Toys R Us kid.
Next up, for the games that took up most of my time in 1991, we're still staying with the PC, and this one is Civilisation. Now, in the early 1990s, this was exactly my jam. Civilisation delivered for me a game where you had to be totally focused on resource management, expansive exploration, and be totally dedicated to the grind to level up to make yourself the strongest player in the game. And people still wonder why RPGs, or especially JRPGs, was the game genre that I was going to make my home in when it came to the later part of the 90s. Now, in many ways, Civ was just a step up from SimCity. The big step up, of course, being the battle mechanics. And as a huge fan of the board game Risk back in the 80s, blending that style of tactical combat into a game that required the level of resource management that SimCity gave us, well, it was always going to be a winner in my eyes anyway. And not only that, the element of roleplay where you could take on one of several civilizations from their very beginnings and try and push them forward towards the space age. Each civilization's having its own unique traits. The exposed weaknesses are highlighted strengths. This, of course, was for a thinking gamer, and at the ripe old age of 18, that's exactly what I was looking for in my downtime. And not only that, it was a decent length of a game. You could easily put hours upon hours into Civilisation, or if you made one too many mistakes, you'd be lucky to last an hour. And it came to me just at the point in my life where the short attention span of a kid dissolves and becomes much more mature and much more ready to sink your teeth into a longer, more thoughtful gaming experience. And Civilisation had so many facets to it that it filled each and every one of these voids perfectly. Now of course I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, not everyone likes strategy, not everyone likes resource management, but for the sheer genius of this game alone, then I heartily recommend, if you haven't played it, then definitely source yourself a copy and sit down and play it for a little while. And who knows, you might be at the time of your life just now where this is exactly what you need. And that's the fantastic Civilisation from the wonderful Sid Meier in 1991.
Introducing the next generation from Nintendo. New Super Mario World. Created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a bit more exciting, a bit more challenging, a bit more graphic, a bit more colorful, a bit more realistic, a bit more levels, a bit more secrets, a bit more enemies, a bit more friends, a bit more sound, a bit hotter, a bit cooler, a bit weird, a bit more revolutionary, a bit more Mario, a bit more of what you want. It's 16-bit, and it's yours only if you get new Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
Next up for the games that took up most of my time in 1991, well, the winds of change had certainly reached me by this point, because that game is Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, only a few times in your life will you come across a game that you could class a game changer, and Sonic the Hedgehog was definitely a game changer for me. As you've seen for the past few games as well as the past few years, choosing the home console outlet for my video game pleasure was something that I wasn't really interested in, sticking mostly to the microcomputers and then onto the PC. But the first time that I laid eyes on Sonic the Hedgehog, everything changed, because for the very first time I was blessed with a game that truly did have arcade quality. Now don't get me wrong, the Mega Drive / Genesis wasn't exactly up there with the state of the art of arcade cabs at the time, but the sound speed and colour that absolutely blazed out of Sonic the Hedgehog captivated me from the very first time I laid my eyes on it. So much so that I had to make it top priority to get my hands on a Sega Mega Drive, which in turn for the first time would make me a console gamer. Now of course I still played on PC, and yes, I would dip back into the ZX Spectrum, but with the sheer artistry of Sonic the Hedgehog I knew that home consoles were going to be a big thing, and there was no longer the shame of calling yourself a console gamer. And on top of that, it gave me the pleasant surprise and introduction to the joypad. So it's without doubt that it's very much thanks to Sega, Sonic Team and the Blue Blur himself, that I didn't become exclusively a card-carrying member of the PC Master Race. Now of course I haven't been talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, because if you're watching this video you've definitely played or experienced Sonic the Hedgehog in one way, shape or another. And all that's left to do is say yes, definitely play Sonic the Hedgehog in 2023. Of course Team Sonic did improve on it greatly with Sonic 2, but this is where it all started and it's definitely still worth playing today. The wonderful Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Mega Drive in 1991.
Kingdom, Hogan! Feel the power of Hulkamania! New WWF talking wrestlers are big, eat says six fighting phrases! Using the real voices of Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior! Listen! I am the Ultimate Warrior! I challenge you, Warrior! I accept the Ultimate Challenge! Gonna be a great battle the way these guys are talking! New WWF talking wrestlers, they're big enough to be talking tough!
And the next game that took up most of my time in 1991, and we are going to be staying with the Mega Drive, or Genesis if you're across the pond, and that game is Streets of Rage. Now you have to remember in 1991 that the arcade was still king. It was certainly still king in my eyes, so much so that I drifted away from my beloved ZX Spectrum because it just couldn't compete with the arcades anymore, not in any meaningful level. But there was a new kid on the block, well, at least a new kid on my block, and that was the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis if you're from the States. And although it couldn't quite compete with the arcades when it came to side-scrolling beat-em-ups, Streets of Rage was certainly an indication that we were on our way when it came to home consoles. The graphics and sounds, of course, totally outstripped the ZX Spectrum, and despite not having just the same amount of magic that you could get in the arcades, this was a free way to play the game. Well, I say free, you did need of course to buy the console and buy the game, but when you considered the amount of money that you would have thrown into the arcade cab, and combine that with the amount of money that your friends would have thrown into the arcade cab beside you, well, it was certainly a reasonable option. And coming from the ZX Spectrum games like Vigilante and Target Renegade, the difference was absolutely night and day. Now that doesn't mean that I'm knocking those ZX Spectrum games, because I still sit down and play them today, as they are absolute masterpieces for the systems they were working on. But this is 1991 and we needed so much more. And when it came to multiplayer couch co-op, well, you couldn't do much better than Streets of Rage. Now the side-scrolling beat-em-up wasn't exactly my genre of choice, but the in-person social aspect of playing video games was very strong in 1991. Well, it was very strong throughout the 90s, and being able to sit beside your best bud and play through Streets of Rage in your very own bedroom at a level that was almost arcade quality was a very special thing indeed. Now many people will tell you that Streets of Rage 2 is a far superior game, and they wouldn't be lying. But if you do have a little bit of nostalgia for the beginning of the series, then definitely get your hands on a copy of Streets of Rage, go back and give it a good playthrough, especially if you've got a friend that can play through it with you, because without a doubt that is the most fun way to play this particular game. And that is Streets of Rage on the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis, from 1991. So there you go, my friends, that's 1991 in a nutshell through the eyes of yours truly, and it was a phenomenal year. It was the year that dragged me away from PC gaming and shone a light on console gaming, a light that I didn't expect to follow at any point up until then, but Sonic, he just dragged me by the ankles into the console scene, and I'm so glad that he did. Now this part of the video is about you, because I need you to drop into the comments and tell me all about your 1991. Now don't worry if you weren't born in 1991 yet, or you were too young to remember it. Let me know if you have any experience of the games that you've seen today, any of the movies, or listened to any of the music, because the interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. Now there are plenty more Pixel years for you to peruse if this is your first one, and I'll drop the playlist up there for you. And if you want to catch up and keep up to date, well, you can subscribe down there, just so you know when the next Pixel years comes up. Thank you very much for watching as always, and until next time, cheerio!